Hi, folks. Lou here. And I'm going to talk about something that perhaps doesn't affect games a great deal of the time, but is important in history. And since I do two of these videos a week, sometimes I don't mind doing one that's mainly historical rather than about games. And of course, anybody who listens can decide to take advantage of that historical angle as games are becoming broader and broader in scope, let's say. So this time I'm going to talk about the second in command in countries and how sometimes the second in command becomes the commander. That is, not by succession, but simply by agreement. Whoever is officially the emperor or president or whatever is not the person who makes the decisions, the big decisions. I'm not going to be able to explain how that happens, but I can explain what happens. Now, an obvious situation here is that you have hereditary succession and the successor is a minor, 10 years old, 14 years old, is not regarded as a adult yet. Then you have somebody who's the regent. And there have been occasions in history when the regent overthrew whoever was supposed to be the ruler and became the ruler. But more often than not, the regent serves and may continue to serve and continue to control things even after the official king or emperor or whatever has reached adult age. Well, you can see how that's going to happen. But most of my other examples are rather different. For example, the obvious one is the Japanese shogun. There were at least three shogunates. The last one started in 1603 with the Tokugawas. And Japan always had emperors, but the emperors did not rule. The shoguns ruled. Now, there were occasions when the emperors, in effect, revolted against the shogun, and they always failed as far as I remember. I'm not a big expert on Japanese history. Why did this happen? And of course, this brings up the distinction between a head of state and a head of government. In England, for example, or in Britain rather, nowadays, Charles III is the head of state, and he does a lot of ceremonial stuff, but he makes very few decisions. The head of government is the prime minister. In many European states, there is a president, but he is or she is mainly there for being a head of state and not a head of government. In other countries, the president is the head of government, as in the United States, and apparently in Ukraine, and certainly in Russia. So you can have those two functions separated. If we go to the case of viziers in Muslim nations, especially when it was a vizier of the caliph or caliph, originally the caliphs were the rulers, but at some point they became more ceremonial and religious and did not rule, and their viziers more or less ruled, although what was official and what was actual are two different things sometimes. Another case is in Merovingian lands, where the mayor of the palace, quote unquote, became the actual ruler, and the Merovingian kings were there for ceremonial purposes. Charles Martel, the famous general who won the Battle of Tours, was not the king of France. He was the mayor of the palace. And I believe it was Charlemagne's father who finally crowned himself king and shoved the Merovingians aside. In Rome, you had the Magister Militum in late Rome. Sometimes the emperors did not amount to much, and the Magister Militum, the chief of the military, was the actual ruler. Stilicho or Stilicho, however it's pronounced, is an example. In China, you have the eunuchs. Well, this is something that just sort of developed, and the eunuchs controlled the access to the Chinese emperor and more or less made the decisions in many cases. There was always a push and pull between the eunuchs and a Chinese emperor. But there were other epochs of Chinese history where this was not the case. And of course, why were they eunuchs? So that theoretically they didn't have descendants that they might try to manipulate the government to help out their descendants. On the other hand, in the United States, you have a vice president and a president, and I know of no case where the vice president has made most of the decisions. Now, there was a case where the president's wife made most of the decisions. That was Woodrow Wilson late in his second term, when he was very ill and essentially incapacitated, and his wife was the one who made those decisions. But keep in mind, back then, the president had much less to do with what happened in the country than is the case now. There's this notion that the president runs the country, and of course he doesn't. He doesn't make the laws. He doesn't allocate the money. But a lot of people don't understand that. So the upshot of all this is there are many cases, and I'm sure we could think of more, where somebody other than the official ruler is in fact the ruler. And in some cases that can be institutionalized, as in the shogun or the mayor of the palace, so that it lasts for many, many decades or even centuries. Thanks for listening.